pieces. I have two bishops, a knight and a queen, attacking a king supported by bishop, queen and rook. So in the round 5 of the Croatian League, I faced Željko Bedic, an opponent rated about 2050. He was 2100 recently, and we have played before. We have one draw where I had black in the semi-slav. In this game I played e4. So as you may know, I play e4, d4 and c4 now, depending on what my opponents play. And if they play the French defense, I will almost always play e4. I love playing against the French, and I especially love getting the normal Tarrasch with knight f6. So d4, d5, knight d2 the Tarrasch, and knight f6. And after e5, everybody plays knight d7. If you've seen my previous game in the French, my opponent played knight d7 and I beat him, but it was a normal game. In this game, my opponent played knight e4. If you've never seen knight e4, it's a very risky move and white should be significantly better. Now, the only reason I had excellent preparation for this move is that my opponent has played it before. He has played it 2 times before, and there was one game in particular where he got destroyed. So I prepared the line, which is very, very tricky for black to face. So knight takes pawn, knight takes knight, sorry, pawn takes knight. And now the key move, bishop c4. Now why bishop c4? Well, it prevents c5. In many lines, c5 should be the optimal move, but you simply cannot play it here. In the Tarrasch French and in the French, black would like to play c5. In this case, if you play c5, there's a bishop on c4, and its main purpose is to help play d5. So now after d5, people usually play knight d7, going into this line, de, fe, and now white plays knight h3. So what's the point? Knight h3 prevents knight takes pawn. Why? Because of queen h5, and then you don't have any control over g5 or g6 or any squares. So after knight e5, queen h5 check, what do? You have to play knight f7. When you play knight f7, I go knight g5. If you play g6, I take the knight. So that doesn't work. And after c5, d5, if e takes d5, then queen takes d5, and white has huge initiative. Queen takes, bishop takes. If knight c6, then I just take on e4. If knight e5, then bishop f4. And look at these two bishops, compare the two positions. White should be significantly better, and it's going to be very hard for black to develop the queen side. The best move after bishop c4 should be a6, against which a4, knight d7, c3, c5, knight e2. Sort of a normal game, but this pawn is going to be in trouble after knight g3, and I'm going to take the pawn. So when I played bishop c4, Mr. Bedic thought for about half an hour, and I'm not over-exaggerating, because I bet he was remembering the game he'd lost against bishop c4 in this line, and he played a very strange move, knight c6. Luckily, I was prepared for this too, and of course I play c3. And knight c6 isn't really a good move. Why? Because a6, b5 cannot be played. You cannot play c5. So this pawn chain b2, c3, d4, e5 cannot be disrupted. He played a6, and now I simply played bishop b3. Why? So that I have the option to play bishop c2, take the pawn, b5 doesn't come with tempo, and my position is very safe. Here he already got something close to a losing position. He played g6. In the French, if you don't get your pawn breaks in, and it's clear that c5 isn't happening and f6 isn't happening after g6, you're never getting your pieces out, so you're going to be worse. So now I had to think, do I take the pawn with the queen? Do I play bishop c2 and take with the bishop? No, why? I mean, my bishop is good, my queen is good, so why not take with the knight? And look at f6. So I wanted to play knight e2, knight g3, knight takes pawn, and knight f6. And what exactly is black supposed to do about that? I don't know. If f5, I can just take it. So I played knight e2. h5 doesn't really work because of knight g3, h4, knight e4. Bishop g7, knight g3. Okay, he castled. I took on e4. And in this position he played h6, preventing bishop g5 and knight g5, but weakening g6 and h6 in the process. And I castled here. The engine plays h4. And then after b5 by black, it plays h5. Says black should play g5. And now f4. And the best move according to the engine is g4 with a +4 advantage to white. I didn't see this, so I castled, which is still +3. It's basically, I'm a pawn up. I have better pieces. I have better attacking chances and a safer king. And yeah, everything is in my favor. He played b6. I just developed with bishop e3. The engine plays knight f6, which I did see, but I didn't want to trade this knight for this bishop. It made no sense to me. The engine plays knight f6, bishop f6, ef6, queen f6, and then bishop h6. Now, why would I trade my knight from e4 for the bishop on g7? I didn't want to do that. So bishop e3. Bishop b7, f3. Now there are no tricks. There are no tricks in this position, and, well, nothing can happen, basically. King h7. Queen e1. I want to get my queen to the king side. Knight e7. He has the f5 square. Rook d1. Knight d5. And now bishop c1. One other benefit of rook d1, other than lining it up with black's queen, is that I have a safe square to retreat my bishop. The engine doesn't want to play bishop c1, it wants the bishop on f2, but I didn't want to block my queen. a5 by black, queen g3, the queen is coming in, and you can see that white is a pawn up, but that's not the worst of it. The knight on e4, the bishop on b3, the bishop on c1, the queen on g3, the f-pawn supported by the rook being able to move to f4 and then to f5. It's very, very scary for black. King h8, a3, knight e7, looking at f5, queen h3, knight f5. I was trying to make something work from this position, but I couldn't. Some tricks with knight f6 or knight g5. Knight f5, bishop g5. Now, of course, the pawn is pinned, it cannot be taken, and I'm conquering the f6 square. Queen f8. And I have to say, I never had more fun playing a game. And I think that's understandable, because I'm so much better that it's very hard to mess this up, and you just get to build a natural attack. It was very pleasing to play this. My opponent played queen f8, I played g4. The h6 pawn is still pinned. The knight moves away to e7, and now bishop c2. Now look at these pieces. I have two bishops, a knight and a queen, attacking a king supported by bishop, queen, and rook. So he played king g8 unpinning, bishop f6. I want to trade his main defender now, because that's the thing holding his position together. He played knight d5. And in this position, I should have played f4. I should have played f4. It was my main candidate move. I ended up spending a lot of time here. And if f4, bishop takes f6, then my calculation wasn't taking, but playing c4. And now one of the pieces is going to fall. Let's say, I don't know. The engine plays bishop h4 here. If bishop to g7, for example, then I can just take this knight and the attack goes on. But instead on knight d5, I played bishop g7, which is still okay, still big advantage. King takes g7, rook d1. I want to support my e-pawn and break through with f5, and I want to prevent knight e3 coming in. Okay, and in this position, again, instead of rook d1, I should have played f4 to prevent knight f4. I had been expecting knight f4, but he didn't play it. I was thinking, if knight f4 here, then I play queen g3, and I start moving my h-pawn, and eventually I'll be able to go knight f2, knight h3, or knight d3, getting rid of this knight. But in this position, instead of knight f4, he played g5. And now look at this. My knight's coming to h5. So I'm going to be able to trade off this knight. He plays, I played knight g3, of course, wanting to go knight h5, knight f4, and knight h5 check. And I was expecting him to trade. I wasn't really sure what to take with. If knight h5, I was thinking gh5, followed by f4, but that leaves my king very exposed. So queen takes was also a candidate move, followed by h4. But he just played king g8. And now I just took takes, takes, and what I thought was the winning move was bishop e4. I was expecting him to resign here. I mean, it's resignable according to the engine, but now it seems very hopeless, because now his bishop on b7, his only active piece, isn't really good. He has to move the bishop away somewhere. If he moves it away, then I just take the rook, unless he moves the bishop to a6, in which case I could consider trading, but I wouldn't. If he takes the bishop, he's just losing material, because there's no way to defend f4. And the last option was c6, which he played, which I thought was the worst option. I would rather give up a pawn, because now the bishop's completely dead. And c6 is a target. And if he ever plays bishop a6, I take on c6 and then on a8. So rook f2, preventing bishop a6 because of bishop takes c6. Queen e7, queen g2. Maybe queen g2 was a mistake. He should have gone queen h4. I wanted to free up my h-pawn, so him blockading was very logical. King g7, queen f1. I wanted to transfer my queen to maybe d3, maybe e2. Maybe put pressure on f4 with queen d3, queen d2. h5. Rook g2. Now this pawn cannot be taken because I take with the rook and his king is extremely unsafe. So rook a g8. And now queen f2. Queen f2 prevents queen h4. Still, if he takes on g4, I take with the rook. So king f8. And now king h1. Now I would be really happy if he took everything, because then f4 would be hanging. For example, takes, rook takes, pawn takes. How do you defend the pawn? And also rook f1 is coming. And bishop g6 is coming. So on king h1, he played f5, which was a huge surprise to me, because it helps me open up the position even more. I took ef6, queen f6, and rook eg1. Now if you don't do anything, I can go g5, and I have a passed pawn that's just moving forward, and he played h4, preventing that. Now two things have happened. I have a passed pawn on g4, and my king is perfectly safe. The only thing I was afraid of was h3. So I was thinking of playing g5 here, where he doesn't have time to play h3. But to be honest, I didn't want to risk anything. I figured my position was winning, and it is. If you turn on the engine, this is +5. So there's no need to take any risks. So I just played h3. And that's fine. It's okay. Now h3 is never happening. My king is always going to be safe. And all I have to do is get my rook to e5, maybe h5, maybe win this pawn, maybe win this pawn, maybe win the pawn on e6. I just have to play it slowly. So rook g5 blockading the pawn. On the next move, I would have played g5. Rook e1, switching my attention to e6, king f7, queen d2. Now looking at f4 as well. Rook d8, queen c2. Maybe there are some tricks with bishop g6. Rook d6, rook d2. Rook g8, queen b3. There's no need to rush here. You have to savor a position like this. Rook d2, a4, queen c2, bishop a6, attacking my rook, so rook g2, or threatening to attack my rook, so rook g2, queen g5 blockading the pawn, bishop d3, blunting his bishop and preparing rook e5, rook d5, and now I want to play rook e5, but I don't want to recapture with the pawn because that defends all of his weaknesses. So rook g2. Now that the bishop is on d3, I can safely infiltrate on e5. Rook e8, rook e5. And yeah, now I think this is game over from a human perspective. I don't think there are any tricks anymore. I'm simply controlling the entire board, and he has weaknesses on c6, e6, f4, and h4. Queen f6, queen e2, tripling up, bishop c8 defending, queen e4, in many positions threatening rook f5. For example, if rook d6, then rook f5. So he played rook g8, moving his rook away. And I just brought more attackers to the pawn. So bishop b1, I want to play bishop a2 and overwhelm the pawn on e6. Bishop d7, bishop a2. And he is forced to take. If he plays rook d6, I just break through on e6. So rook e5, queen e5, queen e5, rook e5, and this is a very, very simple, very, very clean endgame where I have zero weaknesses. His only pawn breaks are b4 and c5, and they are never happening. And he has 4 weaknesses. Rook d8 played, king g2, improving my king, king f6, rook h5, bishop e8. Now I didn't want to take immediately because of bishop g6, and my rook is sort of restricted. If I play rook takes h4, then bishop g6, and on rook h6, king g7, I have to play g5 and then h4, and my rook is kind of out of play. Not that I couldn't take, I just didn't want to risk things, so I played rook e5. There's no need to rush. Bishop f7, king f2. I wanted my king on c1 because it looked safer and more active. Rook d6, king e2, bishop g6, king d2, bishop h7, king c1. Now I thought everything was defended and I can finally take the pawn on h5. So bishop d3. This I had calculated correctly, that he couldn't play bishop f1, bishop h3 because of rook h5, and my pawns are too strong, so bishop b1. And I had calculated this before getting my king to c1. He did play bishop f1, and then when I played rook h5, he didn't take. Yeah, he played rook d5. If he takes on h3 now, then I don't take straight away, although I could. I play g5 first, and the king only has one safe square, and that's g7. So king g7, and now rook h7 check, king g8, and now I take on h4. Now the king is on the back rank, now I'm attacking the f4 pawn, and I'm just gonna have too many passed pawns. So on rook h5 he didn't take, meaning that this was useless. He played rook d5. Of course I don't want to trade rooks, because then I lose my h3 pawn, and he has a passed pawn on h4, so rook takes h4. He played e5, counterplay, but it doesn't work because of bishop e4. Rook d8, and now d5 check, king e5, rook h5 chasing the king back, king d6, rook h6 check, once again chasing the king back. If you play king c5, I take on c6 with check. He played king e7, and h4 was the final move of the game. Here he resigned. There are no tricks with bishop e2 and rook d1 because I have bishop c2. I'm just defending everything, and I'm gonna take on c6, queen my pawn, and win the game. So I have to say, it gave me a lot of pleasure to play this game, especially since it was a team tournament, and I cannot say that I played well. The position was just very easy to play, but I'm still happy. Thank you very much for watching. You're gonna see the last round from the Croatian Cup tomorrow. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.